You know, we often think of happiness as something we arrive at a destination, like the peak of a mountain. We imagine that once certain boxes are checked, the right job, relationship, health, security, then, and only then, we'll finally feel happy. But that idea, while comforting, is fundamentally misleading. It sets happiness somewhere out in the future, always just out of reach, always conditional. The truth is, happiness is not a destination at all. It's a way of being, a daily practice, one that requires intention, presence, and a certain kind of discipline. Think of it like this: happiness isn't the summit, it's the stride. It's found in the step-by-step movement of how we engage with life as it unfolds, especially when things aren't ideal, especially when life is uncertain, imperfect, and undeniably difficult. You don't wait for the rain to stop to begin dancing, you learn to dance in the rain. And that's not just poetic sentiment, that's emotional intelligence, that's resilience. Psychologically, what we call happiness is less about pleasure and more about meaning, coherence, and alignment. Research in positive psychology suggests that people who report higher levels of happiness don't necessarily have fewer problems, they just relate to their problems differently. They develop a mindset that allows them to interpret adversity as temporary, to find purpose even in pain, and to return to their core values when circumstances shake their outer world. It's about shifting from a passive to an active role in your emotional life. Instead of asking, "When will I feel happy again?" ask, "What choices today will nourish my peace?" That question alone reorients the mind toward agency, not control over the world, but control over how you meet the world. And here's where philosophy meets psychology. Ancient Stoics, for example, didn't define happiness as the pursuit of pleasure. They called it eudaimonia, flourishing through the exercise of virtue, reason, and inner strength. They believed happiness was found not in getting everything we want, but in cultivating character, in responding wisely and courageously to life's inevitable hardships. In that spirit, happiness becomes a matter of consistency, not condition. It's brushing your teeth, emotionally a hygiene of the mind. That might mean starting the day with 5 minutes of silence before the chaos begins. It might mean writing down one thing you're grateful for even when everything feels broken. It might mean showing kindness to a stranger, or choosing not to engage in negativity when it's easier to lash out. These are small things, but repeated often enough, they recalibrate the nervous system, shape your neural pathways, and build the kind of emotional stamina that transforms the way you live. And the beauty is, it doesn't require perfection. You're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to have setbacks. This practice of daily happiness isn't about avoiding pain, it's about remembering, over and over again, that you are more than the moment you're in, that you can still choose, and in that choosing, you build a life that isn't just bearable, but deeply alive. So don't wait for happiness. Build it gently, quietly, persistently in the way you move through each day. Because in the end, it's not the absence of struggle that defines your joy, but the presence of meaning in the midst of it. There's a quiet kind of strength in learning to accept what you cannot control. It's not flashy. It doesn't always look heroic from the outside, but it's one of the most liberating psychological shifts a person can make. Because the truth is, much of our suffering doesn't come from the actual events of life. It comes from our resistance to them. It comes from the constant, exhausting effort to force reality to be different than it is. We resist change, we resist loss, We resist uncertainty. We grip tightly to how we think life should go, and when it doesn't cooperate, we experience not just the pain of the moment, but the additional suffering of our refusal to accept it. And yet, the world doesn't bend to our preferences. People leave, plans collapse, health fails, expectations go unmet. These things aren't errors in the system, they are the system. And when we finally understand that, not just intellectually but viscerally, something shifts. Acceptance is often misunderstood. It's not passivity. It's not resignation. It's not saying, "This is fine," when it's clearly not. It's simply saying, "This is asterisk." It's meeting reality on its own terms, without defensiveness, without protest. That doesn't mean we stop striving for change where we can, but it means we stop trying to fight the tide with our bare hands. We learn to stand in the current without drowning in our expectations. From a psychological standpoint, acceptance reduces internal conflict. When we stop arguing with reality, the mind becomes less fragmented. There's less inner noise. That opens the door for clarity, for calm, even for creativity. It allows us to respond rather than react. Acceptance puts us back in alignment with what's real, and that alignment is what makes authentic action possible. Think about it. If you're constantly focused on how unfair something is, or how it shouldn't be happening, your energy gets trapped in a loop of complaint. But when you accept the moment as it is, no matter how difficult, you reclaim your agency. You can say, "All right, this is where I am. Now what can I do from here?" That's power, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that endures. Philosophically, this echoes across traditions. In Buddhism, acceptance is the first step toward liberation, the idea that suffering arises from clinging, and freedom comes from letting go. In Stoicism, again, we find the same truth. Focus only on what you can control: your thoughts, your actions, your character. The rest is not up to you. And by surrendering that illusion of control, you find an unexpected kind of peace, the peace that comes not from fixing everything, but from finally stopping the fight. Life will always offer us things we didn't choose: hardship, unpredictability, impermanence. But how we hold those things, how we relate to them, makes all the difference. Do we meet them with resistance or with presence? Do we collapse under their weight, or do we let them pass through us without becoming who we are? Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop trying to wrestle the storm, and instead learn to stand in the wind, grounded, open, unshaken by what you cannot change. Gratitude is one of those ideas that's easy to dismiss because it's become so common, stitched into greeting cards, plastered on social media, turned into a hashtag. But beneath the clichés lies a profound psychological and philosophical truth. Gratitude changes the lens through which we see the world, and when your lens changes, everything changes. Gratitude doesn't deny pain. It doesn't sugarcoat suffering. It doesn't pretend that everything is fine when it clearly isn't. What it does, and this is critical, is shift your focus from what's missing to what remains, from what's gone wrong to what still offers value, even if only in small and quiet ways. And this shift in attention has real, measurable consequences for your mental and emotional life. Neurologically, gratitude has been shown to activate areas of the brain associated with reward and positive emotion. Practicing it regularly can lower stress hormones, increase resilience, and even improve sleep. But what's more interesting is how it rewires your perception. The human mind, by default, is wired to scan for threats, a survival mechanism. That's why you can receive 10 compliments and 1 insult, and guess which one you'll replay in your mind all night. The negative one. Gratitude interrupts that bias. It doesn't erase the insult, but it balances the scale. It brings context. It reminds you that not everything is broken. Philosophically, gratitude is a form of humility. It's a recognition that not everything good in your life is of your own making, that even in your darkest hours, someone, somewhere has offered you a moment of grace. It might have been a kind gesture, a beautiful song, the way sunlight fell through a window at just the right moment. These things are not trivial. They are reminders that beauty and goodness haven't disappeared. They're simply quieter than the noise of your problems. But here's the key. Gratitude is not a mood. It's a discipline. It doesn't always arrive spontaneously. Some days, it's a decision you make in defiance of your circumstances. You choose to notice. You choose to acknowledge. You pause not because life is perfect, but because even in its imperfection, it's still offering something worthwhile. A breath, a memory, a chance to begin again, and you don't need grand moments to be grateful. In fact, the most powerful kind of gratitude is the kind rooted in the ordinary. The smell of coffee, the warmth of your bed, the sound of laughter through a wall. These small anchors tether you to the present, to reality as it is, not as you wish it were. And from that grounded place, you begin to reclaim joy. Gratitude doesn't solve everything, but it softens you, it steadies you, it brings light into the cracks of your thinking and reminds you that even here, even now, there is something worth holding on to. So don't wait for a perfect day to be grateful. Make gratitude the reason the day becomes meaningful, because when you change the way you see, you change the way you live, and that, in itself, is a kind of quiet revolution. Happiness, in its most sustainable form, is built from the ground up, not in rare, spectacular bursts, but in the quiet accumulation of small joys. And I want to emphasize that, small joys, the kind that seem almost too minor to matter, too ordinary to count. But that's the mistake we often make. We wait for the big moments, the promotion, the vacation, the resolution of some major problem, thinking that happiness comes in milestones. But life isn't lived in milestones. It's lived in minutes, and it's what we do with those minutes that shapes the texture of our emotional life. When we talk about small joys, we're really talking about attention. Are you noticing what's already here? Are you awake to the flicker of beauty in the mundane, or are you rushing past it, chasing the next thing that promises to deliver more? Most people, without realizing it, defer happiness. They say, "I'll feel better when," and fill in the blank. But the when never quite arrives, or if it does, it's fleeting. Then it's replaced by a new condition, a new contingency. Small joys don't require ideal circumstances. That's what makes them powerful. They can coexist with grief, uncertainty, stress. A warm mug between your hands in the middle of a difficult morning. The sound of your favorite song on a drive to somewhere you don't want to go. The laugh of a friend cutting through the fog of your anxiety. These are not solutions to your problems. They are lifelines, reminders that even within the hard parts of life, something good is still whispering to you. Psychologically, this is about training the mind to recognize and register positivity. Our brains have a built-in negativity bias, which means we're more sensitive to what's wrong than to what's right. But we can counteract that by consciously savoring the small things, not just noticing them, but pausing long enough to let them sink in. This is how moments become memories, how passing sensations become nourishment. A brief moment of joy, fully felt, can carry more weight than an entire day of distraction. There's also a philosophical depth to this practice. It teaches you that happiness isn't found by escaping life, but by entering it more fully. When you slow down enough to witness what's good, not ideal, not perfect, just good you're aligning yourself with what's real. You're no longer demanding that life entertain or reward you. You're allowing it to reveal itself, and in that revelation there's meaning. So ask yourself, what would it look like to build a life that's not just endured, but enriched one small joy at a time? What would happen if you stopped chasing happiness as an outcome and started cultivating it as a habit? Because ultimately, joy is not something you find, it's something you learn to notice. And in the noticing, you begin to live with your eyes open, which is, in its own way, a form of waking up. When life becomes heavy, your ability to stay upright doesn't depend on how tough you are, but on how kindly you treat yourself. We've been taught that resilience is about pushing through, about mental toughness and emotional grit. And yes, endurance has its place, but the deeper, more sustainable kind of resilience, it begins with self-compassion. Now, self-compassion is often misunderstood as weakness or indulgence. Some people worry that if they go too easy on themselves, they'll become lazy or unmotivated. But the science says otherwise. In fact, studies show that people who treat themselves with compassion are more likely to take responsibility for their lives, bounce back from setbacks, and persevere through difficulty. Why? Because they feel safe enough to face what's real. They're not paralyzed by shame or self-criticism. Think of it this way: if a close friend came to you, overwhelmed and hurting, would you respond by telling them to get over it or toughen up? Of course not. You'd listen. You'd validate their pain. You'd remind them of their worth even in their messiness. That's compassion, and it works. Yet somehow, we withhold that same grace from ourselves. We hold ourselves to impossible standards and then punish ourselves for falling short. But you can't beat yourself into wholeness. You can only walk yourself there patiently, gently, honestly. Psychologically, self-compassion soothes the nervous system. It reduces cortisol, lowers anxiety, and promotes emotional regulation. But beyond the science, it reconnects you with something profoundly human, the understanding that suffering is universal. Everyone fails. Everyone struggles. Everyone has moments when the ground beneath them disappears. When you stop isolating in your pain and start recognizing that you're not alone in it, a strange kind of comfort emerges. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start remembering it's part of being human. And here's the philosophical heart of it. Self-compassion restores dignity. It's not about denying your flaws, it's about meeting them without shame. It's about choosing to see yourself as worthy, not because you're perfect, but because you're trying, because you're showing up, because you're still here, in a culture that rewards performance and punishes vulnerability. That's a radical act. It also builds a sturdier kind of strength, not the brittle, performative kind that collapses under pressure, but the rooted kind strength that bends without breaking. When you know how to return to yourself with care, you become more resilient, not because life gets easier, but because you stop abandoning yourself when it gets hard. You become the steady presence you need, especially when everything else feels uncertain. So the next time you fall short, feel overwhelmed or lose your footing, pause, breathe, ask yourself, what would kindness look like right now? And then offer it, not someday, not when you've earned it, but now, in the middle of the mess. because the most profound form of resilience isn't about never falling, it's about remembering, every time you do, that you're still worthy of getting back up. One of the most overlooked aspects of happiness, especially when life feels hard, is connection. Not just the surface-level interactions we have in passing, but the deeper sense of being seen, known, and valued. The truth is, we are not meant to do this alone. We are relational beings, wired for belonging. And yet, in a world that glorifies independence, many of us end up silently suffering in isolation, believing that vulnerability is weakness and self-sufficiency is strength. But when you strip everything else away, the achievements, the status, the possessions, what really matters is the quality of your relationships. The people you laugh with, cry with, sit in silence with. The ones who remind you of who you are when you forget. It's these human connections that ground us, that pull us back from the edge when things fall apart. Psychologically, connection regulates our nervous systems. A single moment of genuine empathy can lower stress hormones, reduce feelings of fear, and restore a sense of safety in the body. This isn't just emotional, it's biological. We are calmed by closeness. And that's not a sign of weakness, it's evidence of what makes us resilient. But here's the deeper point. Connection doesn't require everything to be fixed. Often, it's not the solution that heals, it's the presence. Someone sitting with you in your pain, not trying to solve it, but simply refusing to let you carry it alone. And that presence, that willingness to show up for one another, is a form of love that's more powerful than any advice or strategy. Philosophically, this speaks to a core human truth. Meaning is often found in relationship, not just romantic ones, but friendships, community, even brief moments of shared humanity, a stranger's smile, a quiet nod of recognition. These micro moments of connection remind us that we're part of something larger than ourselves. They expand our identity beyond the confines of our own struggle. Of course, connection also takes courage. It requires us to be real, to drop the masks, to risk rejection, to admit when we're not okay. But that's the paradox. The very thing we fear, being seen in our imperfection, is often what creates the deepest bond. When we dare to be honest, we give others permission to do the same, and in that shared space, something beautiful happens. We begin to heal not because we've escaped our pain, but because we've stopped hiding in it. Connection doesn't have to be grand. It might be sending a message to someone you miss, asking a real question instead of making small talk, listening with your full attention, or simply letting someone help you, even when your pride resists it. Because sometimes the most powerful act of strength is not standing alone, it's allowing yourself to be held. So if you're carrying something heavy, reach out. If you see someone else struggling, show up. Because happiness isn't just found within, it's woven between us. In the moments where we choose each other again and again, despite the chaos.